Senator Lindsey Graham, one of President Trump's closest allies and the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you.
The Democratic House managers, the prosecutors, filed their trial brief last night, and they said that the president is trying to put himself above the law. Here is their key quote. "That is what President Trump has attempted to do, and why President Trump's conduct is the framers' worst nightmare." Your response, sir?
Well, as to obstruction of justice, the president tried to exercise executive privilege. He said to the House, who was trying to impeach him, in 48 days. From the time they authorized impeachment until they voted on the articles was 48 days. It's the first impeachment in modern history without outside counsel. It was a partisan railroad job, and one of the reasons he's being impeached is that they had to do it in such a hurry he could not exercise executive privilege. Now, I've got a quote from Senator Schumer I won't read today, but I'll let it out tomorrow, saying that any president has the right to defend the office, and Article 2, obstruction of Congress, is about the president saying, I want to go to court to exercise executive privilege over documents and witnesses. Instead of allowing him to do that, they impeached him for obstructing Congress. They tried to put Trump below the law. Abuse of power is so poorly defined here. I don't know how presidents in the future can conform their conduct. It's the first impeachment in history where there's no allegation of a crime by the president.
You have been very clear over the last few months where you stand on this case. Here are a few of your clips.
This is un-American at its core. What the House of Representatives is doing is a process of political revenge.
I think this is a bunch of BS. This thing will come to the Senate, and it will die quickly, and I will do everything I can to make it die quickly.
All right, let's talk about that die quickly. First of all, counting votes, have you given up on the idea that the Senate Republican majority is going to vote to dismiss this case right away on Tuesday? Is that dead for practical purposes?
Yeah, that's dead for practical purposes. There are a lot of senators who I think will wind up acquitting the president, but believe that we need to hear the House's case, the president's case, answer to the House's case, and ask questions, and then that's when the witness request will be. So the idea of dismissing the case early on is not going to happen. We don't have the votes for that, so we'll play it out along the Clinton model.
All right. You say then, the next big issue, you say that there is no need to hear from witnesses in this trial. But, sir, that directly contradicts what you said as a Republican House impeachment manager in 1999 during the Clinton impeachment trial. Let me put up a quote from then. You said, "There may be some conflict that has to be resolved by presenting live witnesses. That's what happens every day in court, and I think the Senate can stand that." Question, why were witnesses okay then, but they're over the line now?
Well, the people being asked for by Senator Schumer are the Secretary of the State, the Chief Staff to the President of the United States, the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, and the acting OMB Director. All these witnesses were available to the House. The President has said he would claim executive privilege. Here's what's happened. In the House, they did this in 48 days. They never allowed the president to exercise executive privilege, and when he suggested he might, they impeached him for obstructing Congress. Now, I'd like you to ask Mr. Jeffries the following. What are we supposed to do in the Senate regarding executive privilege? If it's going to be invoked, who determines whether or not the privilege applies? Clearly, to me, any president would ask for executive privilege regarding these witnesses. And if they were that important, why didn't you call them in the House? Do you need them to make your case? The people called by the Senate were Blumenthal, Vernon Jordan, and Monica Lewinsky. Blumenthal exerted executive privilege, but that was litigated in the House, and the court ruled against Blumenthal. What they're doing here is they've got a railroad job in the House, and they're trying to fix it in the Senate, and I'm not going to be part of that.
Okay, let me ask you about this question of executive privilege, because you're quite right. President Trump has said if the Senate tries to call Chief of Staff Mulvaney or former National Security Advisor John Bolton, that he will assert executive privilege, and you've indicated you'll support him. Take a look.
I'm not going to defy executive privilege. The president said he would invoke executive privilege. I hope no Republican will destroy executive privilege.
But in the 1974 case of the United States v. Nixon during the height of Watergate, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously on the Nixon tapes. And here was the key quote from the court. The generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated specific need for evidence in a pending criminal trial. So isn't the precedent, the legal precedent about executive privilege, that it must yield to the need for evidence? And there is evidence that John Bolton, for instance, could give that it was impossible to get any other way. Isn't the precedent clear that he cannot invoke executive privilege to prevent John Bolton from testifying?
No, he can't invoke executive privilege. There's a Supreme Court case that says when you deal with national security issues, the privilege of the president is at its highest. The president has never had a chance to invoke executive privilege regarding John Bolton or anybody else. They're asking the Senate now to destroy that privilege. You have a Supreme Court case on executive privilege because it went to court. And here's what Schumer said in 1998. To suggest that any subject of an investigation, much less the president, with obligations to the institution of the presidency, is abusing power and interfering with an investigation by making legitimate legal claims, using due process, and asserting constitutional rights is beyond serious consideration. They literally impeached President Trump because he wanted to exercise executive privilege. They said, no, that is obstructing Congress. This privilege attaching to Bolton has never been to court, and at a minimum, it should go to court.
Well, I guess I don't want to get too much into the weeds here and litigate this, but there's 2 points. One, in the Nixon tapes case in 1974, the court said the assertion of executive privilege must yield to evidence in a criminal case, and the president is being tried in a criminal case. And in an,
this is not there's no crime unless you.
Well, he's being tried for high crimes and misdemeanors. You can argue that it doesn't rise to that, but that's what the trial is all about. And secondly, the Supreme Court has also ruled that when it comes to deciding whether or not the executive privilege, it's not going to go to the court, because there was a case involving a judge named Judge Walter Nixon in which the court basically said, you know what, we're not going to weigh in. When the Senate is involved in an impeachment trial, their word stands.
So the point you're trying to make here is that we've got a Supreme Court case that was litigated after Nixon invoked executive privilege. The president has never been able to go to court because they wouldn't let him. I'm not going to legitimize a House impeachment process that calls the Secretary of State, the Chief of Staff, and the National Security Advisor of any president and deny them their day in court to protect those essential national security advisors, come to the Senate and destroy the privilege because it could never be used in the House. The bottom line here is if these people were that important to the case, they should have called them in the House. Executive privilege was raised by Clinton. He went to court and he lost. You're trying to get the Senate to legitimize what I think is a political railroad job. I'm going to vote to honor the privilege, and if the privilege is to be decided by the United States Senate, I hope we will all honor the privilege, because here's the way to destroy it. You impeach a president, you don't let him exert executive privilege in the House, you deny him or her their day in court, you come to the Senate and you strip it away. You've destroyed executive privilege through the impeachment process. That would really make the presidency far less effective and would hurt the constitutional balance of power. And that's exactly what they're trying to get us to do. Listen to Schumer in 98, if you don't believe me.
Let's get out of law and let's get back to politics.
Okay.
Because more and more of your Republican colleagues are saying, not committing to it, we put 5 up here on the screen, that they're at least open to the possibility of witnesses. Now, the Democrats, if they hold firm, would need only 4 GOP senators to come over to their side so they'd be able to call witnesses. Your best guess as a vote counter, will the Senate end up calling witnesses?
If we call one witness, we're going to call all the witnesses. There's not going to be a process where the Democrats get their witnesses and the president gets shut out. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to vote against calling the 4 witnesses requested by Senator Schumer. They're all covered by executive privilege. They're part of the national security team of the president. They could have been called in the House. They chose not to. Apparently, they don't need them to make their case. Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the whistleblower. We can look at those allegations of misconduct outside of impeachment. I want this trial to get over with as quick as possible. I want the people of the United States to pick the next president, not a court of impeachment. And I'd like to be spending my time working on prescription drugs and national security issues instead of this.
Okay, I got two more.
Let me just say one thing. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I just got two more quick questions to ask you, and we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. You talk about wanting to get through this, the trial as quickly as possible. There are reports that Republican Senate Leader McConnell is going to put out a rule on Tuesday that for the opening arguments, 24 hours for each side, he's prepared to put the Senate in session 12 hours a day. So basically, the House prosecutors would get 2 12-hour days, and the defense would get 2 12-hour days to make their opening arguments. One, is that true? And two, if it is, how do you respond to the Democratic impeachment managers who say this is just a rush to get this over with?
Well, to my friends on the Democratic side, I like Nancy Pelosi. I've known her for years, and I think she is a very religious person. But when it comes to Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi may pray for him privately, but she's orchestrated the Church of Holy Hell. From the time Trump has been sworn in to now, it's been one thing after another. Here's what I'd say to the House folks. You took 48 days to impeach this president. You did not allow him to call any witnesses. He could not have a lawyer present during the House Intel Committee. This has been a partisan railroad job, and you're asking for fairness in Senate. You violated every norm of what we do. It took 5 years for Starr to look at Clinton. Mueller looked at Trump for almost 2 years, and you took 48 days. So here's what I would say. The sooner this is over, the better for the country. We can get back to do the business of the American people and do things that really matter to them. I've been very consistent. I supported Mueller. I trusted him to be fair. This has been a political hit job. This is political revenge. And what they're doing to the presidency is a danger to the institution itself.
And finally, in 30 seconds, I think it's fair to say that you are the senator who is personally closest to President Trump, and at various points you've said that he's mad as hell, he's demanding his day in court. I assume you've spoken to him recently. What's his mood? How does he feel about the fact that he's about to undergo a trial for removal in the Senate, and what does he want from the Senate?
I think he wants to have a chance to have his day in court that he did get in the House. It'd be nice to have a lawyer present. It'd be nice to request witnesses. I guarantee you he'll get a better deal in the House than Senate did in the House. But his mood is to go to the State of the Union with this behind him and talk about what he wants to do for the next rest of 2020 and what he wants to do for the next 4 years. He is very much comfortable with the idea this is going to turn out well for him. He believes politically this has helped him. He thinks it's a threat to the presidency. The one thing he talks to me constantly about is what does the next president do after this if this is successful? He does not want to legitimize attack on the presidency, and that's my #1 goal, is to do this trial in a fashion that no House, Republican or Democrat, ever again will do what this House did.
Senator Graham, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you.